If you're a fan of all things quiz, you will almost certainly have come across his work. He is a puzzle creator, question writer, TV, YouTube, and podcast producer. He is David Bodycombe. Welcome, David.
Hi, Gareth. Thanks very much.
It's great to have you back on the channel. We've had you on Quizzy Monday before, but it's great to spend some quality time with you and find out a bit more. Now, I've been looking into your history as far as I can. Your early TV credits have two utter classics of British TV, Treasure Hunt and Crystal Maze. How did you get into TV and those shows in particular?
Well, I struck up a friendship with Chatsworth Television, who are the company that made both of those shows. Crystal Maze was first. So when I was at university, the first episode of Crystal Maze came on, and I just went, oh, wow, this is a really different show. And I just went to bed that night sort of thinking, wow, it's like I could just sort of imagine these games popping into my head, just sort of various ideas. And so I eventually sort of thought, well, maybe I'll send some in. I don't know why I thought they would even look at them particularly. But I used probably what was probably Word version 3 at the time and some isometric paper to sort of design them out. And I sent them off to the producers. And David Croft, who was the director, but also was responsible for getting the game together, he was just delighted that somebody else out there was thinking of stuff to fill the show that he didn't feel quite on his own. So they did accept one for the next series, which was a children's game. And so I just kept sending in like maybe 10, 20, 30 ideas, and they would probably use about 4 each year. Eventually just decided to go leap into the world of freelance, and I managed to get a few different jobs, working either for radio shows or I got a newspaper column in the Metro newspaper when that was a new thing, and then also a few bits of TV work continuing my relationship with Chatsworth. So I was working with Justin Scroggy, who was the guy I ended up sending my games to for Crystal Maze. He also got the job on Treasure Hunt, so I was sort of like his number 2, writing the clues for Treasure Hunt as well.
So is the puzzly side of things your first love, your kind of gateway drug into all of this? Or had you always been interested in the full range of quiz questions and puzzles and mind-mangling challenges?
Yeah, I think I'm not an out-and-out quizzer. I mean, like if I was put in a pub quiz, I wouldn't really do particularly well. I don't really enjoy the list learning aspect of it. It's sort of, to me, it's a bit like learning the opening moves in chess, and I just find that side boring. What I do love, though, is working out the sort of building in clues so that you can work out answers to a question. I've always loved that kind of thing. So, but I have enjoyed, like, I grew up in the era of Trivial Pursuit and all of the spin-off games that come off the back of that. Well, that was sort of during my sort of teenage years, I guess that was. And I've always liked sort of things like the fighting fantasy books, and I enjoyed devising my little board games and playing those with my family, some murder mystery stories and whodunits and things like that. So, yeah, quite a wide range of brain teasers, stories, puzzles, questions, games, really quite broad. And I wasn't really a specialist in anything particular, which I think is quite unusual for me, for our industry. I mean, I think there are lots of people who are specialists and like they just like crosswords and they're really, really good at that, or they just like logic puzzles and they're super brilliant at that, like the people at Cracking the Cryptic and so on. Whereas I'm much more of a generalist. I don't do things in as much depth. However, I have got a lot of experience in a lot of different mediums and a lot of different types of puzzles and content, generally speaking.
And talking of one of your puzzles, famously, you created the car park puzzle, which I'll probably bring on screen to refresh people's minds, 20 or so years ago. And since then, it's been everywhere, all over the internet. It's even been in sort of a Hong Kong school exam. Is there anything you can do when you come up with such a brilliant idea like that to protect it? Or is it really, once it's out there, it's open to the wolves?
Technically, I mean, there have been people that have actually used my original artworks. I mean, they are pretty much bang to rights. That said, I mean, you could argue that at some point during my Metro columns, I must have used either identical or very, very similar puzzle mechanics, or even identical puzzles to the people that have been writing these puzzles for 100, 200 years. So, I mean, as it happens, the ITV show Ridiculous, for the first time ever, licensed that puzzle because they knew it was by me, and they said, "Oh, can we? If we pay you some money, can we have that one?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I also wrote them about 10 or 12 others for that show. So that's the first time I actually earned any money from that puzzle, apart from it appearing in that original book, as you mentioned.
So you did a bit of TV early on. Now, I think I first came across you when you were question producer on Only Connect. How did you become involved in this cerebral show stuck away on BBC4? How did that come about?
I don't exactly remember how I found out it was being made. It might have been because there was a contestant call out or something like that. But I had heard that it was being made, and it was being made in Wales. And I sort of knew which production company was making it. And I went, okay, so this is a show that involves questions, but they're also puzzles. And you sort of need somebody who's a bit puzzly and but also knows their way about like what sort of things people will know. And so I wrote about 20 sample questions, and I met up with the Chris Stewart, the executive producer, and Peter Jameson, who was the original series producer, at a hotel in London. And I sort of said, well, I think I would be a good fit for you. And I completely forgot to tell them any of my questions. So when they said, actually, could you send us some questions? I went, oh, actually, yeah. I forgot about that, and I had to send them afterwards. But anyway, they liked what they saw, and they knew that I would sort of get the hang of it. And it was a slightly different show in those days because it was a BBC4 show, so it had to be a little bit more cultural. We couldn't do so much stuff like sport and Simpsons questions. But that was basically how I got the job. I think half the time people come to me because just a reputation, and half the time I hear something that I really like the sound of, and I sort of stick my foot in the door quite hard and go, actually, I think I could do some good work with you.
So you were brought on by Only Connect. Presumably the kind of framework of the show was in place, but how much freedom did you have to kind of determine the subject matter, the content, the types of puzzles? Was that stuff from you?
There was quite a lot of pilots. They'd done 2 pilots actually, which I saw both of, and I think about 80% of the question style was about there. I think there were some questions that were just a little bit too difficult to decipher in 40 seconds. I think if there's anything that I tried to put into the question style, it was like the sense of, even though there are only 4 boxes, me and Peter Jameson, the original series producer, were very keen on trying to give the questions a sort of a flow or a story. So it felt like the question might be heading in one direction, and then clue 3 would come up and you go, oh, what the heck is that? So for example, it might be like constable, sergeant, and then like up the Khyber or something like that. So it looked like it was the link was ranks, but actually it was Carry On films, and you sort of go, okay, so there was that sort of thing. So we tried to put in journeys, and then I think, as I said on the live stream the other day, the whole thing of trying to drip feed clues into each box, so that even if you didn't know anything about the subject matter, just the little clues that you could add up from the 4 clues meant that if you had to put a gun to your head and go for an answer, you would be able to sort of perhaps gabble at something that was in the right area. So then the only other sort of thing that I had an input was that the rounds were really in the wrong order.
Right.
That they had the wall as the last round, which was silly because, of course, if one team was 11 points ahead of the others, there was no way of catching up, and it also meant that you could win and the other team were not even on the screen. Originally, it was round one, then the vowels as a sort of like a sort of change of pace, then it was sequences, and then it was the wall. So like me and several other people all sort of went, that's a bit wrong. And then there was a bit of a hoo-ha about whether the wall should allow you to pick up bonus points if you had not got the right four. Were you allowed to pick up bonus points anyway? If we told you, okay, let's see how the grid should have resolved. Okay, now you can pick up bonus points. And they originally were going to be really tough on that and say, actually, we don't think people should get bonus points. And I said to them, look, I love the idea of this show, but when I watched the pilot, I actually fell asleep during the wall round because people weren't getting points. And I said, there's so little scoring opportunities. You get 3 of your questions in round one, 3 of your own questions in round two. You get one wall, and then 90 seconds of missing vowels. There's so little scoring opportunities. So please, can we reconsider that and let people have the bonus points? Because it's nice to see people scoring. And so they like that. Literally was a last minute change about 30 minutes before we were recording the first episode. What was great about Only Connect, I have to say, in fairness to the whole production team, and this was really, it's just very sad that we lost Chris Stewart recently, but like, what was tremendous about his style of producing was, and also Peter as well, was that they would listen to sense, and it doesn't really matter where the input had come from. They didn't sort of tunnel vision on anything particular, and then everybody was valued, and any concerns from any quarters or any good ideas were fed in, and they would listen and come to a really sensible consensus.
Has it taken you by surprise, just the sheer longevity of that show?
Well, I thought I've always felt it was a bit like drilling for oil. Like the more you drill, the more you find. You sort of think, surely we must run out of oil eventually. But then you sort of go, well, if you throw enough resources at it, then like in my day, we only probably had sort of somewhere between 6 main writers and maybe a few sort of part-timers. And then I would come up with about 30-40% of the show myself. We had fewer shows in those days, only about 15 shows a series, but nevertheless, that's still quite a heavy workload. And I just got sick of having to go into reference bookstores and looking at the indexes of all of the reference books to see if I could find anything that would have sequences in it, because that was the by far the hardest things to write for. But I did as best I could. But when I got to series 8, I remember just on the very final day, I was sort of up at 4 a.m. just trying to tweak the grids to be as fair as possible for the grand final of the grand final of the grand final. And then I just went, I think I've done enough. I'm like, I'm really tired. I can see the sun coming up out of my window in Cardiff Bay out in the hotel. And while this is fun, it's also, if I was to do more, I would start to repeat myself. And I always tried to, as much as possible, make sure that every show felt as unique as possible, and that we wouldn't really reuse ideas particularly. And I felt when I start to repeat myself, I'm going to stop. So I stopped after 8 series, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm also slightly glad that I stopped when I did, because I think I would go a bit loopy if I'd done any more. But it's obviously they've done an amazing job of keeping the thing going, and they'd have a lot more writers now, which helps her, but it's still a massive undertaking because they've got twice as many shows a year. So
yeah, indeed. But it's been a wonderful success, and I think if it hadn't got through those early years, it wouldn't be with us now. So fantastic work on your part. You've since gone on to do a number of things with Tom Scott, who was a contestant on Only Connect back in those early years. Game Garage, Money, Disconnected, most recently Lateral. how did you two come to work together?
The earliest time I remember meeting Tom was when he was with his father and he came on Treasure Hunt.
Oh, okay.
He did actually come on Treasure Hunt, but at I if I was to exactly pinpoint the time in which we decided to work together on stuff, I wouldn't be able to tell you, unfortunately. It's just been a sort of gradual coming together of like, well, we've got ideas, let's do some stuff. And unfortunately, the process of piloting stuff in TV, although television, the costs have come down, the number of competitors has gone up and up and up. And it's just so much easier to just do, like, if you've got a quick and dirty and easy idea that you want to test out, it's now getting to the tipping point when it's actually easier just to fling things up into YouTube and see what happens to them. And some of for example, the game garage ideas that we've had, a couple of them did actually get formally optioned by TV companies. They haven't gone serious as yet, but things like Disconnected happened because somebody said, we've got this virtual studio, do you want to use it for a couple of days? So we went, yes please. So that's just sort of Tom's pulling power, being able to sort of get access to these resources. But it's great working with Tom. Like we're very sort of similar minded in terms of like, just if there's something cool that we want to do, it's just great to be able to put the content out there and just let people make what they want of it.
And so the latest thing is Lateral, which is a podcast. I know there's been some a YouTube version of it as well. And what's really interesting for me about that is Valerie, my fiance and sort of co-creator of All Things Quiz, she loves it. I introduced her to it. She's not a quizzer at all, but she loves the play along ability. She loves the fact that as a listener, you can bounce your thinking off the thinking of the other people. And so it's got something for everybody, for your hardened quizzer, but also your kind of more just casual podcast listener. How on earth do you strike that balance of getting things that are just interesting and challenging enough to involve anybody?
There's really only two different types of question on Lateral. There's basically wow, this thing's amazing, or the second type is wow, people are really stupid. and so like if I read a question that somebody sent in and I sort of go, wow, that's an amazing fact, then I go, okay, is there a way in which we can seed some clues into the question so that there is even if you can't work it out, there's at least a little bit like Only Connect. At least you can start to sort of ask about, well, like, that question said North America. It didn't say USA. Why is that? Or like, why is this woman's name? Why does it sound Polish? Is that relevant? Or, there are ways in which you can either mislead or help the people playing along. But alternatively, if you read a question and it makes you laugh, I do think that there is a strong relationship between question writing and joke writing, in that they both kind of have a punchline, and quite a lot of the Only Connect questions had a bit of a joke or a bit of a laugh out loud moment to them when you realized what they were. And when I wrote for Quiznos, I went into that. I asked them, is this a question writing job or do you need people to do jokes? And they said, oh, no, it's definitely a question writing job. But it had to be a question writing job where you had to have an awareness of the humor behind where the joke was telling you. So that's what I look for in a lateral question. And so even if you aren't really a quizzer, hopefully it comes across as a fun show where some good fun people have a chat, and like half the time they're playing a game and half the time they're sort of telling fun anecdotes and having a giggle, and hopefully we get the balance about right.
Well, it certainly works for Valerie, because she wanted me to be very clear on how much she enjoys that every week when it pops up in her podcast feed. So
thanks, Valerie. You must be the one that's listening.
Are there any shows you've worked on or ideas you've had which it frustrates the hell out of you that they didn't fly, that they didn't somehow catch either the TV world's attention or, didn't get the longevity they deserved?
Um, there was one idea that we had with ITV quite recently, which was an AI-based quiz, where effectively the AI would sort of write the questions. And of course, since then, everybody's now been on that sort of front. Everybody's been posting things on Twitter saying, "Oh, look, I've put in some film titles into Twitter and this AI. What are these?" So we were at least 9 months ahead of the curve on that, and it was a bit of a shame that we weren't able to catch the wave because now it just seemed like such a really obvious thing that there's hardly format behind it. But at the time, we felt like we were doing some really important work there. There was one garage game where it involved getting people to sort of set a benchmark time. And so they had to like either stack some sugar cubes or like grab as many pencils in their hand as they possibly could. And so we saw like a little video montage of 7 people trying to do this task as best as they possibly could. And just the montage videos of those were some of the funniest things I've ever seen that we've ever done, because some people were absolutely rubbish at the simple tasks. Like we had this one where you had to sort of bounce a ball and then add 7 to the number you're thinking of, and like one guy I think could only get to 1 before he made a mistake. And he had a full minute to try and better his time, and he better his score, and he still couldn't do it. And then we had somebody making a stack of sugar cubes, and again I think technically everything fell down at the last minute, and so he only scored 1 sugar cube. So I think there is something. It's still in that format. You could get 7 celebrities to set the targets, and then it was called Above Average. It was called Above Average. If anybody wants to search it, it was because the idea was you took the 7 people's targets, averaged them out, and then you had to see if you could beat the average of those 7 things.
You've also launched another podcast in the last year or so, utilizing your kind of, shining a light on behind the scenes in sort of game shows and that world. How did that come about?
Well, I mentioned Justin at the start when I was talking about Crystal Maze. It's Justin Scroggy. So he's sort of been my life mentor. I've known him, wow, it must be 30 plus years. And we would have quite long phone calls during the week anyway, sort of for an hour or two. So we just decided, well, rather than just us just yakking away, why don't we sort of make this a bit of a useful way of putting down our life experience and just general gossiping into a format that could be useful to other people. So whether it's people who are runners and just sort of getting the start in the business, or people that work in the industry who want to catch up on maybe some bits of industry news that they haven't heard from elsewhere, or like what you might call the more sit forward viewer. So people like yourself who are sort of professionally interested in how the business works, and whether if you're a regular contestant or you're just interested in television generally, then we're trying to just explain a little bit about how the television industry works, and go into the sort of whys and wherefores of why some ideas work and some don't.
And who would be your dream guest?
Well, apart from you, Gareth, which haven't had you on, we haven't actually had the creators of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on. I suppose David Briggs would be nice, but he has told the story of how that came about many, many times. Somebody who's presented a lot of formats would be interesting. Like somebody like Carol Vorderman would be great, because she's actually done a lot of shows, or Davina McCall, or someone like that would be good. So if you're listening, better get in touch. Yeah. So yeah, the podcast is called TV Show and Tell, because the idea is that as well as talking about television, we get guests to sort of bring an object to tell us about, which has something to do with their career. It's just sort of a device to hang the show off.
One of the things you mentioned that people might find interesting in TV Show and Tell, potential runners, etc., And you mentioned it earlier, how you sort of got into TV production. Is that sending in questions, sending in ideas, putting yourself in front of people? Is that still a really good way of getting into TV question writing, puzzle writing, if people want to?
Absolutely. I mean, programs need content, and there's not really any great sort of closed shop. You don't have to be part of the official question writers union to send in stuff. Just like anybody could write a cryptic crossword potentially. So in the same way that I just liked Crystal Maze and started sending in stuff, when I was question editor on Only Connect, if someone said, "Oh, I've got a few ideas, can I send them in?" I said, "By all means, but make sure that they're good and make sure we haven't done them before." That's all I ask. Just make sure you've done your homework, and make sure you're not wasting time of like coming up with the really obvious stuff about planets or prime ministers or whatever, or at least dress them up in a different way. So as long as you get the style of the show as well, then even relatively heritage shows such as University Challenge and Mastermind, you can work for. I mean, like the Mastermind are literally just about to run a course in Northern Ireland for local question writers for Mastermind, because they want to get more people locally writing for the regional production there. So that's another aspect that's different from how I started. So if you especially if you're working in places like Bristol, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, there are many quizzes that are filmed in those regional hubs now, not just London. So definitely keep an eye out for productions in those sorts of areas, because you are wanted. But yeah, but by all means, just do your homework, find out who the producers are, find out like who's responsible for looking over stuff. Most, not all, but most shows will at least look over things, and then if you just write maybe 20 questions in the house style that you think would be good for the show, then just see where it takes you. People will always need good content, and if you're on whatever it is, series 42, program 20 of University Challenge, like why not your questions rather than anybody else's? On Lateral, I have an open shop on that as well. It's like if people have good question ideas, then we either give people a credit if they're just members of the public, but I do have a small handful of people I've selected that we pay for questions on that show as well.
So it is a remarkably kind of open industry in that respect, and obviously you've got to be good to be kind of kept on and to get a reputation and to keep going. You've written a question writer's guide that you've kindly said we can use to support some of our Quiz Academy videos.
When you start on a TV show, there's usually like a piece of paper or from the question producer saying, "Here's our house style, and like avoid these common mistakes." And everybody would slightly do it differently, and I would just go like, let's just take all of these sort of house styles and advice, as well as examples of questions that have gone wrong from pub quizzes and TV quizzes that I've heard of, and just try and put them all in one place, so that hopefully we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel and hear the same mistakes again and again and again. So it's completely free. Anybody can download it, and I'll give you the link to for people to download it. And if there's any sort of other examples people have of things that have gone wrong that aren't included in there, then please let me know.
Of everything you've worked on, and there's been quite a lot and quite a lot of variety, what's the thing you're most proud of?
It was probably quite a recent thing, which was the Family Brain Games, which was a culmination of kind of a science experiment meets a kind of a Krypton Factor style family quiz. And it was an extraordinarily hard program to work on. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best program I worked on, but it was nevertheless a program where we got some really good tense moments out of it, where we were able to sort of get these quite clever, well, extremely clever families, but we got them to sort of slightly get them out of their shells and get them arguing against each other, and put them in a stressful situation. And it was, in a nice way. We made sure everybody was still talking to each other when they left the studio, but I just felt like it was, especially in the final round, which is called interrogation, where we give each of the 4 family members a different piece of information, and that's the best way of getting people to have an argument. Is where my piece of information doesn't seem to match with your piece of information, we start to have an argument about why that is, and those were tremendously fun rounds to play. And sometimes they did very well at them, and sometimes they made a complete horlicks of them. And I really, really enjoyed that particular part of the show as well. But the whole show was really good. It was lovely. It was a little bit of a shame. It kind of got a bit. I think it was slightly weirdly scheduled because it was on every single night for 2 weeks, and I think it was a bit too much to have in that amount of time. I think it would have probably been better as a once a week kind of show, but nevertheless, I really enjoyed the sort of some of the really great moments we got from that program.
We've got a question from Yi in Ningbo, China, as one of our members of All Things Quiz. He asks, what's the reason between recently reducing the number of teams as well as episodes for a series of only Connect? I mean, how much insight, I guess, do production teams have on what is commissioned and isn't commissioned in terms of episodes?
Well, the slightly frustrating thing, as I alluded to in Family Brain Games, is that scheduling is a multi-layered jigsaw that the producers unfortunately don't have much control over. Like if the BBC Two commissioners decide that there are this year 29 weeks of Mondays that they need to fill this year compared to 27 that you had last year, that's your problem, and you have to tweak the structure of the very complicated tournament diagram which has been seen on the show several times now, and you've just got to make it work. I think in terms of reusing people, it was just a case of, it was such a shame especially in the early days when finding good teams was quite hard, or at least quite hard to get them to come on and apply. Then it was a shame to just have them on once and then that's it, you were gone. Especially, as I said, there's so few scoring opportunities. If you just got a few rough questions, you potentially could have been series champions, but you just got some bad questions and you were off. So it was just a way of slightly reusing the resource of making sure that people had a decent chance, and then at least it felt fairer that we'd given people 2 or 3 bites of the cherry to perform before we started getting rid of people. But yeah, in terms of like why the series expands and contracts, it's all a matter of like whether they have the budget or the slots available for specials, or whether they feel they want some Champions of Champions this year or whatever. And you've just got to sort of say, well, look, you wanted 29 shows this year. This is how we think it could work, and you've just got to pitch it up and see if they like it.
Well, David, thank you so much for giving up your time to speak to us, but thank you even more for your contribution to the game show and quiz community. What you've given to us with your ideas, your questions over the years has resulted in a huge amount of entertainment and a huge amount of joy. So thank you so much for that and for coming on and speaking to us today.
Well, thanks very much, Kath. It's been a pleasure.